In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to
Hello, and
avoid
welcome to our podcast on the use of names and titles and making these items plural in academic writing. Let's go ahead and see what we're talking about. As always, we need to think of our rhetorical triangle. And so this is the model that we use to try and conceptualize why we are writing and what message we are trying to convey. And so the point is we want the three angles to align well in order to achieve clear communication. So we have to think about who we are as a writer, or if we are using some sort of persona. We also have to think of what we are saying, our subject or message. We also have to think of to whom we are writing. And so if all of these three elements are aligned well, then we have clear communication. But if we are writing too formally for an informal situation, people might think that's a little weird. And vice versa, if we are supposed to be writing exceptionally formally for some sort of important paper, essay, entrance exam, and we are writing too informally, that might also be a little strange. So we want to make sure that all three corners are aligned in order to achieve clear communication. And one way we can be aware of this and make sure that our level of formality is appropriate is in how we use characters or people's names in the pieces we are writing. So here are kind of the rules of using people's names and titles. The first time we use someone's name, we should use their full name and, if they have one, a title. So if we are writing about the Gettysburg Address, then we should probably say the first time in our paper that it was written by President Abraham Lincoln. And then after that, there are other rules once we've used the name once. But again, the first time we use somebody's name, we use their full title. Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. If we're talking about authors, as in an English class, we would just use their first and last name, Harper Lee or John Steinbeck. We need to make sure that the reader understands who we are writing about, so that first time we use somebody's name in our paper, we use their full name and a title if they have one. After that, though, we will call people, whether they are historical figures or authors or characters, we will call them by their last name and their last name only. So, for example, President Lincoln becomes Lincoln. Senator Bob Rumson from the movie American President becomes Rumson. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton becomes Clinton. Now, we can use their titles with them if we need to be a little bit more clear, or if that title plays an exceptionally important role in why we're talking about them. If we need to stress that Lincoln was the head of the executive branch, we could probably get away with President Lincoln. But at the very least, we just need to use that last name, Lincoln. Authors go by their last name too. Harper Lee becomes Lee. John Steinbeck becomes Steinbeck. Hemingway, Trumbo, etc. We cannot and should not be using their first names or some of these crazy other concoctions you see in the bottom right. That guy is Lincoln to you. We don't call him Abe. We definitely don't call him Abraham, not Mr. Lincoln or Mr. Abe. Now, I understand in some parts of our nation, especially in the South, we tend to see people say, as a sign of respect, to call people by their first name with their title addressed also, as in Mr. Chris or Miss Sally. While that might be respectful in casual conversation, it is not appropriate in academic writing. We need to be more formal, and the formal rule is you call people by their last name, not their first. And so we call people and characters by their last name as a sign of respect. Calling people by their first name is simply just too casual. And for many of these people, as they are historical people that we're writing about, or authors or characters, you don't know them. You cannot be familiar with them. So therefore, you must be more formal, and you have to use their last name. Additionally, we do not need to say Mr. Lincoln, or Mrs. Lee, or whatever. Just call them by their last name. That would be appropriate for academic writing. Now, there are times that you may be writing papers where you can't call people simply by their last name. Because, let's say you're writing a paper in government class about the important Clinton family. You have two potential politicians that you're writing about. You have Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. So you probably can't just say, well, Clinton was president in 92, and then Clinton was Secretary of State under Obama. Like, you need to be more clear. So for us as students, we would probably write Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton. The only time we might be able to write as in Bill and Hillary, meaning taking off the last name also, would be if we were some sort of professional writer and we were working on some sort of biography of these two. Less academic in terms of analysis, maybe more personal, more biographical, then we could probably use Bill and Hillary. But unless we're in that situation, which most of us probably aren't, we need to use Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, because we can't just use the last name because they're both in the book, so we have to be a little bit more specific. Additionally, we might need to be wary if we were writing about the Bush family, as in George Bush and George W. Bush, both of whom were president at one time. We can't just say Bush, because which one? The father, the son, the one who came first, the one who was later? We need to be more specific. So in that case, we might need to say George Herbert Walker Bush, and that is the father, or we could say George W. Bush, and that is the son. So the general rule is the first time you use somebody's name, use their full name and title. But after that, then just use their last name. There are some exceptions where we may need to go ahead and just use both parts of the name if that eases confusion. Now, of course, we do have exceptions in the types of papers we might be writing, so here are a couple of those. If you are writing about the Renaissance era for maybe a world studies class, an art class, humanities, something like that, then these artists have specific ways that their names are to be written about. For example, Michelangelo Buonarroti is better known as Michelangelo. Donato di Niccolo di Betto Bardi is better known as Donatello. And yes, these are the names of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but remember they were taken from these original Renaissance artists. So these guys get called by basically their first name, as in Michelangelo, or they're called kind of a pseudonym, as in Donatello. Additionally, if you are writing about certain characters or people or historical figures who are known only by one name, then we need to use that name. For example, Jesus. You can probably go ahead and write about him as Jesus, or perhaps just Christ. You don't call him JC or something that's informal like that, but you use the one name that we know him by. Abraham, Cher, Madonna, Beyonce, Will.I.am, that kind of stuff. That's the name that they have chosen. They go by one name. We don't look up their last name and try to use that. In this case, the exception is if they're known by one name and they only go by one name, we use that one name. Now, moving on to titles. These are often confusing, yet still an important part of using people's names in academic writing. So the first part is when we have the title of somebody, we need to capitalize the important words in that title. For example, Secretary of State. The S in Secretary is capitalized, the S in State is capitalized, but the of is not. Commander-in-Chief, another name for the role the president has. Capital C for Commander, capital C for Chief. Farther on down there, you see a Joint Chief of Staff. This would be the title given to one of the armed forces leaders who sits on a committee to advise the president. Joint gets a capital J, Chief gets a capital C, and Staff gets a capital S. But of, since it's a less important word, will not be capitalized. So the next step, once we have figured out how to make them properly capitalized, is if we need to make them properly plural, meaning there's more than one of these. And so the task we have is to find the key word or the noun of this title and make that word plural. From there, we have properly made plural the title that we are trying to make plural. For example, if we have a mass meeting of the United Nations and we have leaders from all over the world, we could potentially have many secretaries of state present. And so we look at that and go, well, why do we make plural secretary? Well, that's what their title is. They are a secretary, not somebody who takes notes, but they are somebody who advises. So secretary is the main noun. That is their title, so we make that plural. So at the United Nations, there might be many secretaries of state present. In addition, there might be many commanders-in-chief present. There could be many attorneys general present. And so we need to make sure that we're making plural the correct title part. We would not say that there were many secretary of states present. True, there are many states, and that is plural, but what we have plural here are secretaries, people who advise. So we need to make secretaries plural, and then the of state just defines what kind of secretary they are. There could be many commanders-in-chief. Again, there are many commanders. What kind? In-chief. So make the key word plural, and then let the rest of the title kind of just go with it. So the next couple slides just ask you to do a little bit of practice with people's names, whether you use their full name, whether you use just their last name, and additionally any potential titles that we could use. After each one of these, read it over, stop the podcast, see if you can correct each of these passages for people's names. And here are the answers for that first example with Harper Lee. Here's another example dealing more with government. And here are the answers for that. And one more example, again from government, but with a little bit more historical slant. And here are the answers for that. So that's about all we have for you in terms of using names in academic writing. Again, to summarize, the first time you use somebody's name, use their full name, and if they have a title, use that. After that, just call them by their last name. Additionally, if we do have titles, make sure we capitalize them correctly, capitalizing the important words of a title. And then if we need to make them plural, which is relatively rare, I would say, we need to find the key word of the title, make that plural, and then let the rest of the descriptor follow that. So be careful with this. This helps with the rhetorical triangle, adding levels of formality and hitting the correct level of formality in your writing. Makes your communication a little bit more clear and appropriate for the levels that you are writing toward. As always, if you have any questions, please go ahead and bring those into class. We'll get those answered for you, and we'll be on our way. Thanks a lot. We'll see you soon.